Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon. This is Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and it's great to be back with you. What a week for the world. Holy moly. Sometimes you just wonder. I am very thankful at times like this that I am involved in a totally different world than most people are, to a great degree, of non-standard subjects and cutting edge thinking that really moves us into different realms of possibilities. My special guest tonight is somebody who I knew many years ago and lost contact with, and it's a pleasure to have him on as a guest. Mike Brenner was born and raised in New York City. He's a graduate of the Bronx School of Science and Columbia University, the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Fine Arts, and the George Washington University School of Medicine. He has been an architect and a psychiatrist, and in his early 20s began his exploration beyond mainstream science. In his late 50s, he commenced his spiritual journey, and this is where we are going to pick up with him, especially in the second half of the show. Mike Brenner, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I think we are still having distortion issues that we're looking at before the show. And I'm hoping our intrepid producer, Race Hobbs, can jump in here and be of some assistance to us.
Gentlemen, I'm at a loss on this here. It's all cleared. And it seems like his computer has reverted back to that other microphone somehow. I really don't have any control of it from this end. I just hope it can stop. I don't have any other thing I can figure out.
Well, I can do this probably is turn this power off.
Live radio, nothing like it.
Indeed it is. Hopefully he could come back in, because he did it. You know, he changed his mic right prior to the show.
Yeah.
We did our sound checks and we were having that issue. And so, you know, hopefully Mike can he can reset that other microphone, come back in. He sounded perfect.
It all depends on
right up till we fired the intro, Peter.
Yeah, it sounded good. Again, you don't get this stuff in podcasts. This only happens in live radio, folks. They clean it up. In podcasts, you don't get near the excitement. It's sort of an intellectual's possibility of a NASCAR race where things can crash and burn.
That's
it. You get to watch.
That's why I've been you know, an advocate and remained very proficient in keeping live radio going for 15 years out here for us.
Right there with you, Mr. Hahn.
The best that I can, because I just love it. I love the fact that, you know, we can, let's see if we've got him back now.
I'm back. I
pulled the wrong plug here. I'm afraid to do it again. How's the audio now?
Don't touch a damn thing.
It's sounding good?
Hold your hands up. Don't touch nothing. Okay, gentlemen.
Okay. Then, if all is good, and it is, let me begin by asking you, I know you were born in New York City. Can I ask you where in the city, being a native New Yorker myself?
Brooklyn, of course.
Forget about it. Queens. It's like we're brothers.
Yeah, we're outer borough people, bridge and tunnel folks.
Mike, a great deal of your life has been spent in the sciences, following the fine arts. Can I ask you a little bit about your childhood, about your parents in particular? What did your dad do? Or did your mom work, or was she a stay-at-home mom?
My mom was mostly a stay at home, but uh, at some point she began working part time. My father was in the family business, um, and they did all sorts of things with wood byproducts.
And brothers and sisters?
I have a younger brother, 5 years younger. He's now a retired cinematographer.
Oh, wow. Growing up, and it's a question I ask many guests because it's my own curiosity. Reading and film open worlds to us that before that couldn't even be dreamt of. Some of us were very precocious readers, took to it early. Others of us, especially folks like me who struggled with dyslexia, didn't master basic reading until I was about 8 or so. About when did you start to read? And once you could choose books on your own, what kind of books did you read?
I think I read, some basic children's books fairly early. I'm embarrassed to say that the main reading that I recall doing from maybe the age of 7 or 8 on was in the encyclopedia.
Really?
I used to just read through the World Book.
Wow. What a way to introduce yourself to the world, or the world to you. Did your family go to the movies, or was your introduction to film, in front of the TV?
Oh no, no. I went. I had 4 movie theaters within walking distance.
How wonderful.
You know, I was in Washington Heights, and
Ah,
one of them was one of the palaces that Lowe's built
oh boy.
in the 20s and 30s. It
Yeah.
was. I don't have a way to put my photos up quickly. I'm afraid what I'll do if I try to do that. But I have some shots of the interior, and it was another world.
They were palaces.
Another world to go into that theater, and a huge auditorium.
You
Enormous.
grew up in a great part of the city. I lived in Inwood for a number of years, and my dad also grew up in Washington Heights in great part. I know that part of the city a lot. It's so second nature for city kids to have 4 theaters in the area, where you grow up in a small town. I came of age out on Long Island with one movie theater, and whatever was there was what we saw. Were you drawn to any type of films as a kid, the ones that made you dream big, or just
It was pretty much whatever was showing.
when
But
you were?
it was an interesting part of the world.
Yeah.
It's true. Along the main drag Broadway, everything was available.
Yeah.
And a short walk to the subway, and you get to downtown, midtown, everything is available there in 20 minutes. Up in Inwood, there's a part around Fort Tryon, which is very steep. The land is very steep, and it's believed that it was never logged commercially, and that there's a spit of high ground that's native forest.
Yes,
On
that's
Manhattan
about.
Island. On Manhattan.
It's right on the water,
Yeah.
and it runs for more than half a mile from about 190th Street or so straight up. I've walked in there, and it is untouched forest from before New York City was colonized by Europeans.
Not
It's
only
almost
that,
hard to believe, but
yes,
it's there.
on a field trip at school. It must have been about fourth, fifth grade. We went up ostensibly to see a site in Inwood where the Dutch stole the land from the
Yes.
native, you know. And a friend and I, we snuck off from the group because we found the opening to a cave. And we crawled to the back of the cave. I don't know what we did for light. We crawled to the back of the cave, and we found an oyster shell midden. So shells that had been discarded, by the Lenape people before they were scooted out. That was in the 1950s. Yeah.
That oyster shell didn't get there by itself. And I know the exact spot you're talking about. There is a plaque marking that alleged location. And I used to joke with friends that that's where the Helmsleys and the Spears and the Trumps used to go to worship at night. I lived in the last building on Fort Washington, 730, right below the traffic circle that you took to walk into the park and head to the cloisters. I loved it up there. It was a wonderful place. And, you're less than 20 minutes from Columbus Circle on the A train. It was really just as good as it gets in urban life. When you were a kid, even still in elementary school, was there something that you dreamed of being? For a lot of us boys, it was a fireman or cop or a soldier. Anything that you dreamt of beyond that, or did it include any of those career options?
Well, I'm not sure earlier on, but by the time I was 11, I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer.
Whoa.
Yeah. I have a delightful, funny story to tell in relation
Please.
to that. Because I wanted some advice about it. And I'd seen a book that accompanied a Disney movie. And the movie was about Rocket to the Moon. And the advisor to the film and the co-author to the book was none other than Dr. Werner von Braun. So I wrote to Dr. von Braun, seeking some advice about a career, but also asking a question. I said, the scheme that you show with a rocket taken off from Earth, journeying all the way to the moon, landing on the moon, taking off from the moon, coming all the way back, that it seems like quite a load to try to lift off from the moon. Why not? What do you think about sending a ship to go in orbit around the moon and then dropping a small landing craft? So you sort of to fight lunar gravity, you'd only need a much smaller engine. What do you think of that?
What did he think? Did he get back to you?
Yeah, I got a letter. So my mother saved so much trivia of mine. Why didn't she save that letter? But he wrote back and he said, "Oh no, that was not practical." He said there'd be a problem with it. There'd be a caretaker issue for the ship in orbit around the moon. That wouldn't work.
Well, that didn't work out according to his plan. I'd say, to cut right to it, Jews 1, Nazi 0.
That's exactly right.
Well done.
You joked that the Nazi SOB stole my idea.
I know, it was awkward. He was so handsome. I remember being introduced to him when he had this, when Disney had an absolute infatuation with him. And he would appear on the early Walt Disney show looking like a movie star and, showing these fabulous models, which of course I wanted to build. And the closest thing you could do was a Revell set, which wasn't quite as big and cool as the one that NASA had put together for him. An aeronautical engineer. What did you do to pursue that as you headed into high school? Or did it become something else?
It was kind of a default setting. My art teacher insisted that I go to the High School of music and art for art. Okay. My piano teacher, who came from a famous family, insisted I go to the High School of Musical and Art for music.
Ah,
So I said, "The heck with both of you! I'm going to Bronx Science." Um, you know, and then when I entered college, I thought that I was going to uh, pursue applied physics in the engineering school. And then, then I discovered in my freshman year, um, suffering through honors calculus with the chairman of the department, said, I've been pretty good at this stuff, but I don't like it. It's really not interesting.
mm,
I'd begun to get seduced back to the arts, and back to into the humanities, and it was a long course. My compromise between a technical orientation and an artistic one, of
yes.
course, was architecture. Okay.
And you went on to study and become an architect.
Yeah. I did. I started out at Columbia and then went to Penn, and my mentor was the great Lou Kahn, and that was quite an experience. So I've touched. My life has touched one way or another with some great minds, some great men. Okay. Wilhelm Reich was one by second hand and third hand.
Sure.
And there've been a few others along the way. Tell you another funny story.
Please.
I also found, like engineering and math, I found architecture not fully to my liking. I wasn't born to it. Good at it, good enough, but it didn't click.
Mm.
And I wanted to pursue the teachings and discoveries of Wilhelm Reich, who was.
May I jump in and ask you what your actual introduction was to Dr. Reich and his work?
A very painful one on the treatment couch. But actually, there was an article in Commentary magazine, and then I stumbled on Reich's books in a bookstore near Lou Kahn's office one day.
Which book?
I don't remember. It was probably character analysis.
Yep, my first.
Okay. Anyway, so I wanted to pursue that, having read a bunch of the books, and the only way I could think of to justify plunging into that work would be to become a physician.
You had to become a psychiatrist.
Yes, and I didn't know that I would do psychiatry, but I just knew that I would have the credentials, and I would have the knowledge base.
Yes.
To do credible work on my own. So I've been out of the office for a while, but I arranged to meet with Mr. Kahn, because even though the admissions committees might not know him from a hole in the wall, figure having a letter of recommendation from a world famous figure couldn't hurt.
Yeah.
So I went in and I told him what I was intending to do, and would he write me a letter? And absolute silence. I said, "Oh God, he's going to tear my head off. I'm abandoning the faith. I'm jumping ship. Because this was his religion. He was a mystic and a poet who just happened to make buildings. So absolute silence for a while, and I said, "Oh my God," because I know how he had felt abandoned and disappointed by some of his followers over the years. It's easy to happen when you're a big deal. And then he said, "Mike," he said, "you're proving to me what I've always believed." said to myself, what the hell is that? He said, that I've always believed that an architect can become anything.
Oh my.
And what he was giving his version of Frank Lloyd Wright's belief that architecture was the mother art. It was the most fundamental, comprehensive, enterprise, active enterprise, artistic enterprise that anybody could be involved in. I don't know how much his letter helped, but at the ripe old age of 30, I entered medical school.
Mike, for viewers and listeners who are not aware, Wilhelm Reich developed a science which he called orgonomy, which is simply the study of how energy functions in the living and non-living realms, which essentially gives it license to cut across absolutely every area and discipline of the natural sciences. It is something that has held my imagination and my involvement to one degree or another since I was a teenager. Once you had decided to pursue studies around Reich's work, did you ultimately meet and present to Dr. Ellsworth F. Baker, who had been Reich's first assistant for the last 11 years of Reich's life, or was that yet to come?
Oh no, I met him along the way. He cleared me to begin doing Reich's form of therapy with people while I was a psychiatric resident. I don't want to be too quibbly about words, Peter, but it's very easy for people to assign an ordinary sort of meaning to the word energy. Okay. Because the primary or primordial, quote, energy, end quote, that Reich was studying is really closer to Star Wars: The Force. It's the Atma of in India. It's the Pneuma, the wind, the divine wind of
ether of the Victorians.
The ether in Western Western scientific tradition, but it's like the elephant. It depends on which part of it you're grabbing.
Yeah, I use that analogy often.
There are so many aspects because it's also animal magnetism, a la Mesmer.
Yeah.
And the divine wind, ruach, in the Hebrew tradition.
Yeah.
Anyway. It and it is one of the main ways it works in relation to my teachings. What I've been uncovering and put together is that it helps to explain how exquisitely, accurately, ancient experience is passed down through the ages, through multiple generations, because it's passed down not just in chromosomes, and not just in laws, and not just in stories, and not just in traditions, but also in the field itself. Okay, in the field of the species. One aspect of that is what Jung used to call the collective unconscious. And that is, the most fundamental transmitter of memory. It's behind many phenomena that, ESP, for example, and precognition and da 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 da. So it's a background in my discoveries, and it actually helps to explain a few specific things along the way, but it's not, what I've been developing is not dependent, is not all that dependent on this concept of a continuum that, as Obi-Wan, said, generates connects everything. But one of the interesting things, I won't get into one of my pet peeves, but I'll throw out a teaser because it does appear in my book as a chapter note. But the teaser is, if you accept the existence of this medium, the existence was never disproven, it trashes the Big Bang theory. It makes the Big Bang, which is inherently, which is beginning to come apart at the edges now anyway. But and it's inherently so counterintuitive. Nevertheless, if you accept the existence of this stratum, medium, force, whatever you want to call it,
primordial energy,
stuff of life force, then one of the immediate consequences is that you can toss the Big Bang theory into the trash can.
As I recall, Einstein postulated that we live in a cosmos of emptiness with pockets of life here and there. Reich challenged that theory to the degree that he put forward that we live in an absolute sea of energy, that we're surrounded by it. It inhabits us. We live in it. It's like a fish underwater, and that it's completely active in and around us as we interact on our own. And then, of course, cosmic superimposition, where two energy fields come together, superimpose on each other. And one of the most elegant equations in the world of science for me, and I remember first studying it in my early 20s, was the idea that there was an equation that governed everything from a single-celled animal splitting into two, right up to climax in sex, to how a high pressure and a low pressure front will come together and create a storm system, to how star systems form. And it was as simple as tension, as in mechanical tension, charge, as in electrical charge, discharge, and relaxation. And it governs that entire, transit of life. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's a one-celled animal or a star system, it's the same thing that happens. As you continued to get more and more involved in orgonomy, you were actively involved in the American College of Orgonomy with the colleagues there in Princeton, New Jersey, and an active orgonomist for a number of years there, or out of that organization.
Guilty as charged.
I was a fundraiser. Do you remember?
You may recall that I organized the first and I think only comprehensive conference on Reich's work in Alexandria, Virginia.
That was something to be very proud of.
That was about 1980, 82, something like that.
Yeah. At a certain point for myself and other people who were involved, another observation of Reich's that I always admired was that the kind of neuroses we encounter in a human being, and I know a number of people who are somewhat neurotic, a neuroses can affect an organization, a corporation, a country, to the same degree that it affects an individual human being. And for any number of reasons, I found myself moving on and away from the college as a participant and supporter in the early 90s. And it never has really affected my involvement in the work itself. And I've been privileged to speak at conferences on Reich's work in Nice and in Rome, in Athens, here in different cities in America. There are pockets of individuals all over the world who study this work, translate it, and do their best to move it forward. But it's a footnote to the craziness of the world, unfortunately. At a certain point, though, you look beyond that. And I want to ask you a question here, which is, at any point up until this point in your life, had you experienced what you would now call a genuinely paranormal experience, or anything involved in the world of a UFO sighting or experience, or these were abstract things that you studied that may have been of interest to you to one degree or another?
Those kinds of things, those major experiences, no, I've only read about them, but you know, I've had a pretty good ability, I think, to distinguish between, you know, the writings that are really, well, okay, kind of reliable, and those that are, wow, this is the real story, you know. When yeah, so the I have many experiences, small, medium, and some of them large, you know, that convinced me that there's a great stream, you know, of destiny, and then smaller vortices, you know, that are directing me constantly. Things just happen, seemingly impossible things that, you know, that there's no way in that 10 million to 1 odds, you know, could have played out that way, but it did. So that's I don't feel those things, but the evidence is incontrovertible. You know?
Can I ask you, and it won't be betraying any confidences as a psychotherapist because no names will be mentioned, did you ever have a patient who presented and that you work with who a core issue was rooted in something that we might have considered paranormal, deeply non-standard, or UFO or other intelligence related?
A few times, but it did not come up as a core issue initially. I may have told you about this guy, but if you've heard it, you know, it bears, I think.
I was going to say our audience hasn't heard it.
Yeah. There was a fellow that I was treating bioenergetically, and I just couldn't quite make sense out of how exquisitely sensitive he was, how he could get so powerfully activated, turn colors, you know. What I mean is, it didn't make sense is that his life story wasn't all that bad, you know. There was nothing that you know, was so traumatic. His mother wasn't so terrible, his father wasn't so bad, you know. It didn't click. There was this disparity between the intensity of his anxious reactions, you know, and whatever would come up, or whatever I would, you know, introduce in the sessions. Well, it just so happens that around that time, I got into reading the abduction literature.
Oh boy.
And by the way, when I started reading that stuff, I don't know who I got into first. It was probably your friend Bud Hopkins. But then Dave Jacobs followed him close behind in my reading. And nothing had ever scared me as much in my life.
Whew. Agreed.
I mean, I was really shaken, you know. Anyway, this stuff was registering, and there was just something about some things that this guy had said. And then I forget, one thing led to another, but then he gave a pretty good pretty good story about a veiled memory about a ship, an airplane, and his sister going up. And I put it together, and I said, I think all this is real. I think you had these mind bending, totally disorienting, terrifying experiences, and he didn't say this immediately, but he said soon afterwards, Dr. Brenner, that's what they called me then, he said, I would rather that you told me that I was psychotic.
Yes.
I wish you hadn't told me that had really happened.
I've heard that a number of times,
And
and it's heartbreaking.
He disappeared.
Oh.
He ran away. He had to. He needed to try to do what he could to repress the memories, and clearly being in my presence wasn't going to help that any.
No, not at all. Bud Hopkins' first book, the one that really kind of marked the beginning of serious scientific studies of UFO-related abductions, was Missing Time, which was published in '81. As a respected mental health professional, a psychiatrist working in a certain tradition in school, when you started to read the abduction literature, did you feel there was anybody, any colleague, any contemporary, any friend in the work that you could share this with without jeopardizing your own reputation, sanity, or career?
By then, I was working pretty independently, and most of the more, I was, you might say, bilingual. I had an identity in the standard psychiatric world. I mean, one of my friends was the president of the American Psychiatric Association, for a while, and I was, below the radar doing all this bioenergetic work. But it's by that time, I think I had left the college. I don't want to. Well, the problem, and essentially, it's a family problem. Wilhelm Reich was an untreated trauma survivor.
That's right.
And his crazy family, got reproduced inevitably in the work family, or work families, a sequence of them, but the work families that he created. So there was big trouble there. And
very good observation.
I found my way out. Anyway, so the answer is no. I didn't know anybody. I hadn't yet known of the existence of John Mack, which came about later. Never met the guy. Interesting thing about all the abduction researchers was that their interviews, their research was for them kind of a Rorschach test, because they came to different conclusions about the data that was really too wild and varied to give a very clear single understanding of what's going on. So Jacobs had his, which led him to a lot of depression, and Mack had his, and there was another guy, last name begins with a C.
John Carpenter?
Carpenter, yeah. Everybody had their own interpretation of what was really going on, it's really interesting that, well, I don't want to jump ahead to my own work, but
I want to jump in for a moment just to observe that what you say makes all the sense in the world to me. Um, John Carpenter is now retired, a social worker. John Mack, of course, a distinguished psychiatrist and co-founder of the psychiatric wing of Cambridge Hospital in Boston. David Jacobs, professor of American history. Bud Hopkins, a classically trained painter and self-trained investigative writer. So much like my own background, and we all came to it differently with holding on to a different part of the elephant until we're able to step back and have some sense, try to wrap our minds around the totality of what we're dealing with here, something I am still challenged by after more than 40 years in the field. Reich, of course, was a prolific and often brilliant writer and observer of the human condition. I don't know how many books there are now with his name as author because, of course, manuscripts that were held in a vault in Portland, Maine, for 50 years after his death in 1957, once that period cleared, they started to be published as new books. I'm sure there are 20, 25 books in print probably easily. Reich's very last published work, Contact with Space, published posthumously a month after he died in November of 1957, is for me brilliant. It's also probably the worst first book to read if you're trying to introduce yourself to Reich's work, because it follows like a gun sight, absolutely dead on straight, more than 35 years of energy studies, seemingly they are in very different areas of study. Do you, and of course it deals with not just UFOs, but the intelligences behind them, and actual contact with through the Cloudbuster. Were you aware of Contact with Space when you first became involved in Reich's work? And do you remember reading it for the first time and the impression, how it impacted on you?
I did read it later on. I wouldn't say it had a dramatic impact. It was more like, well, of course. You know,
That's a healthy response.
You know, just to jump ahead a little bit. My own work, very heavily involves extraterrestrials. A long, long time ago, because of how of the kind of revolutionary theory that comes out of what I stumbled across, I leave all of the present involvement out of it. In other words, out of my actual writing and talking, I leave it out. There is an overlap between what's going on now and what went on tens and hundreds of thousands of years ago. And the overlap is this, if I can get into
Please.
it. The initial involvement is I'll get into what this means a bit later and I'll expand on it, but the impact of extraterrestrial humanoid involvement led to a traumatizing, deeply shaming and humiliating and confusing start for our species, most of which is buried in deep amnesia. Although amnesia, of course, is never perfect. And so the original story keeps coming up again and again and again in different ways and keeps getting reenacted without there being conscious understanding of what really went on. Anyway, so our true extraordinary origins as a species is lost in amnesia. Now, right now, the authorities, governmental, religious, academic, do their best to suppress the information, which is really unavoidable and very, very solid about the current visitations to our planet by beings from far, far away. It's in a sense it's kind of absurd, because if you do your polling, you find that, well, what's the figure now? You would know better than me, Peter, but it's in the range of 50% of people who think that these phenomena, have a physical basis. They're real. This is really what's going on. We're being visited. It's around half of the people. So what are they trying to protect us from? And the protection, it's not just the authorities. It's even the media. It was astounding to me that on the day that there was this, mind-blowing testimony in Congress, these pilots, it's like, you just, jaw-dropping testimony. The New York Times and Post, carried nothing. I mean, they were reporting on all kinds of crap. Pardon me, and that didn't appear until the next day, and it was buried on page 17. So the suppression is pretty widespread. Now, if you ask them, why are you doing this? I mean, you got the facts, you got the physical evidence, you got the tapes, you have
Credible witnesses.
Why credible witnesses? Why are you doing this? And the answer that they come up with is, well, if it got out that we're really not alone in the universe, and it'd be too much for people. Which, since half people already accepted, on the face of it, that's absurd. That's ridiculous. But there's a deeper truth and attempt to protect that they're not aware of. And I think what feeds their caution is that encountering the facts of visitation and interaction now could precipitously undo the amnesia and bring us into too much
unpredictability,
too much awareness that we're not totally naturally evolved. We did not create civilization; it was handed to us. It would upend so much. But not only upend things intellectually and spiritually, but also bring up the early confusion and terror. I don't think that degree of protection is really necessary. Okay, and one piece of evidence for that, and it's in, it's in one of the appendices of the book that I'm going to tell everybody about later, called The Movies. And in the movies, ever since 2001, Space Odyssey, bits and pieces of our forgotten history that are recorded in the Mesopotamian tablets and carvings are coming forward as story elements in many, many, many movies. So we're getting inoculated, like with the vaccine. We're getting inoculated with low dose experiences of memory, in a form that we can tolerate. The form is, well, it's just a movie. It's a story. You don't have to take it too seriously, but it is having serious impact because it's the truth. I loved writing that that piece, reviewing all of the films that I could find, that really had a major piece of this storyline that read as if it was just lifted right out of some of the tablets from Mesopotamia. Okay, which of course helps to give me courage about the movie that I'm in the process of. More about that later.
We have a few minutes still to go in the first hour, and of course we will be getting more deeply into what your work has evolved into in present time in the second hour. But it occurs to me, this thing of why the need for those who control information to keep a lid on this. And in governmental terms, the term that's evolved is national security, which I think is kind of an oxymoron, because it's really national insecurity. Those who move the chess pieces about, who are the keepers of the established order, would lose control. And for them, that's intolerable. And superimposing the possibilities that society would simply spin out of control, that Western tradition would spiral into chaos, that religious traditions would face a crisis, that the stock market, of course, would crash, alcohol sales would go up. All of these kind of aspects of mechanical thinking are defense mechanisms holding us back in a way from a heritage.
Let me quote one of my favorite characters, Pogo,
who has met the enemy.
Who said, "We have met the enemy, and they is us." Okay.
God bless Walt Kelly.
So I'm gonna, I'm gonna suggest a radical modification of the formula that you just suggested. Okay, that the bad guys, that's one way to look at it. Okay. The other, and I throw this out somewhere in a book, Evolution Diverted, is that we the people, we the mass, okay? We the mass of suffering humanity, okay? We need to maintain the amnesia. It keeps us safer. We don't want to know a lot about our story, like an individual who's had a traumatic childhood. You ask him, tell me, oh, it was fine. Oh, my family was okay. We need to we need that, whether the story is largely religious or whether it's natural scientific. We need a story that is comforting, and so we hire the authorities, we empower them to keep us in the dark. They are doing what we are unconsciously asking them to do, except if you upstarts like you and me, um, uh, um, the collective is for the most part asking for the repression to be maintained by the authorities.
Yes.
Okay, so it's circular. It's not just we long for freedom and these guys are keeping us in the dark. They're keeping us in the dark and we ask them to, and they do it very well and we keep asking. So until that cycle gets interrupted, which I am doing, I wouldn't say I'm doing my best, but I would say there's a possibility that I can contribute to that, to an interruption. That's what I'm about.
And Mike, I'm going to have to hold you there because we are coming into our first break. This is Peter Robbins with my special guest, Dr. Michael Brenner, and we will be back in 4 minutes. Stay with us.
It's almost here, ladies and gentlemen. The UNX Network Year 2 anniversary at XCon 2023. XCon is being held this year from October the 30th to November 1st at the beautiful Oasis Hotel and Conference Center in Springfield, Missouri. Top speakers include host of America Unearthed, Scott Walter, plus Haley Ramsey, Sev Tak, UNX's very own Maureen Richmond and Dan Terry, Mindy Toutfest, Harriet McFeely, Forrest Crawford, and many more. And they're all coming to deliver new information on topics like UFOs, alien encounters, cryptids and ancient secrets, and real hauntings from the afterlife. Join us for the film premiere of A Haunting in Blue Hill. And don't miss the Mad Hatter Paranormal Halloween Bash, Banquet, and Costume Contest on All Hallows Eve, October 31st. So join us as we close out the 2023 conference season. Info and tickets are available now at unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com, and we'll see you there.
And we are back. And I am just going to refer to my notes here. We're going to be discussing in the second hour, among other things, what Mike Brenner has termed the Mankind Project, in which he challenges skeptical thinkers to ask, what if? What if the ills that have beset humanity since the inception of our species really do stem from our misuse and abuse at the hands of aliens who call themselves gods and whose presence is evidenced in ancient Mesopotamian stone carvings and writings and other ancient records? What if an awareness of this historical origin could begin to heal our broken world through really integrated spiritual life, reorienting therapy, reframed politics. Mike, I'm going to ask you to take it from there, but if you could just bring us into it by talking about that point in your life and your evolution as a thinking person, where you kind of crossed over from established scientific disciplines and thinking into a more esoteric, spiritually oriented realm.
I would say, Peter, that my my spiritual development and increased awareness made my findings and my teachings possible. They were the light that allowed me to read what I found. Okay, so but in other words, I think that what I've been doing is really very solidly real time based. You know, again, I think it's the framework, it's the inspiration. It has helped make connections happen. You know, because I've been open to mysterious connections happening. For example, my work is I'm standing on the shoulders of several big people, including Zecharia Sitchin.
Yeah.
And I hired. I found the perfect entertainment attorney to begin a project to turn my work into a feature film. And he was, talking to a buddy of his in the music and film business, someone at the promoting and production end, who got all excited when my lawyer told his buddy about my project, and all of a sudden I'm connected with an A-list producer who lives 20 minutes away from me, who's a fan of Sitchin's, read all the books, has been sitting on this information, basically not knowing what to do with it all of his adult life. Now, okay, so somehow, guidance is working here. And from what I've understood, the more that you acknowledge the angels, the spiritual entities, the more that you acknowledge what they're doing, the more they can do for you. I think that's I believe that's some of the mechanics, you might say, of the energy. So that's kind of that's the best answer I can give you. The spark was really much more mundane, So I've been reading, Zecharia Sitchin's books, and I was like, wow, this really makes a whole lot of sense. And in my post doctoral learnings, I was getting training that I'd never had before in traumatization and healing trauma. And while I'm absorbing this, I said, wow, the human race, if viewed as a single entity, which is quite logical to do, the entire collective is operating just like an individual who's been traumatized, including being very overreactive and yet at the same time numb, not learning from experience, prone to denial and avoidance, often violent, self-destructive. There we are. And I said, wow, what could have done that for the entire species? This is much bigger than an asteroid strike. Much deeper. And then I a bit later on, I got into, in a way that I had not ever before, into the psychology of the affects, the biological core of all the emotions. And I said, oh my, the entire species is operating just like a person who is trying desperately to avoid the experience of shame. And all of the, I won't get into the specifics there, but it hit me like, wow. Now, what could have made us so prone to exquisitely sensitive, oversensitive to shame? Oh my gosh. If what Sitchin, is positing really happened, that explains it. That explains the traumatization. That explains the shame avoidance, and that's where it took off. And that's where I began to say, Mike. Oh, by the way, Mike is a nickname, but not for Michael. I'll keep what's on my birth certificate under my hat for now. Anyway, I said I got a responsibility here because I'm in a unique position. I've got a pretty good grounding in conventional science.
Yes.
I've got a decent grounding in fringe and beyond the fringe science. Okay. As an architect, I got a pretty good, understanding of how this world works, at the organizational level. I bet there's not many people around who can put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And so for several years, I kept telling myself, Mike, you got to write a book. Got to write a book. And that didn't. I had to wait until the conditions were right. And then when they were, I just sat down and started to write. I had no idea how to write a book.
Nobody does until they do it.
Yeah. Well, that my way is to just jump into things and learn by doing and learn by experience. And there's another piece besides the traumatization and the shame avoidance, and that's confusion about who we are. But I'll get into that later. So I want to clarify that I don't come at this material, these discoveries, as in any way like an historian or an archaeologist or anthropologist, geologist, astronomer, all of those disciplines, by the way, which are going to be necessary to come up with the incontrovertible facts that are going to, make it possible for my theory of divergent evolution, to be accepted as a valid story. Okay. By the way, all scientific laws, are simply the most convincing story at the moment. The most widely accepted, anyway. Anyway, so I come at this as a healer, not not as an investigator.
Correct.
And so that insulates me from what is very, very tempting, and that is what I'd call the wow factor. Wow, this is exciting. Look at this. Look at these discoveries. This has nobody knew this before. And conventional science is ignoring this. And all of that excitement.
It's exhilarating.
It's exhilarating, but it's distracting.
That's right.
It's distracting because, what's important is, what does this really mean for us?
I want to jump in for a moment, Mike, because some of our readers, listeners, and viewers may not be familiar with the name of Zachariah Sitchin. Zach, who was I can't say we were friends, but he was a very cordial acquaintance. And although our disciplines were completely different, he was extremely encouraging to me in my UFO research. I think part of our connection was Russian Jewish background. He grew up in Palestine and was involved in classical biblical studies and went on to become, at his time, one of 200 ranking Sumerian scholars doing first generation translations. I'm guessing he must have written 10 or 12 books, and I've read them all. To a degree or another, his later books, there are points where he asks readers to take a leap of faith that I had problems with. However, his first book, The 12th Planet, was one of the most jaw-droppingly radical, scholarly, challenging books I've ever read in my life. In part, it answered a question that goes back to pre-biblical times in terms of visitations, ancient visitations, in modern times popularized in the 60s first by Swiss-German journalist Erich von Däniken, moving into popular culture. But he shows time and again that Judeo-Christian early writings were confounded repeatedly by substituting certain words or choosing terminology that would keep scholars arguing with each other for millennia. And when you see even the letter forms, some of which are so clearly evocative of the meaning of the word, even today, it's a revelation. And I really have, reading that book, again, I would say it's one of the 10 most mind-expanding in terms of its scholarship, and giving me a sense of why so much in religious tradition is caught up in mystery rather than clarity, and how, with respect for all of our friends and brothers and sisters of faith, that it's a way to confound our thinking to a great degree and keep us separated from this heritage of knowledge and our collective family background. I think that is a wonderful parallel that you mentioned earlier, that, like I had said before that, Reich had observed that human neuroses on an individual basis was often replicated in organizations and political movements. Same thing for our collective history. Point made.
Yes. We're probably in danger of not directing the listeners into sources where they could go to follow up and get in much deeper than we're going to be able to do in what remains of an hour. So I just want to make a pitch for the entry points, and then we'll continue the discussion.
Please.
All right. Easiest way to get into what I think is the core information is this slim little book. Okay, actually, it is pretty slim. See, The Mesopotamian Tale. Now, what I've done with the Mesopotamian Tale basically is do a better job of organizing in a readable sequential way the entire history of Mesopotamia.
Mm.
Because Sitchin was he was unable. He just, well, let's just say, because of constraints of time and everything else, he didn't get a chance to do that. Okay, so this is an easy way in. Now, if reading isn't and this is, obviously Amazon, but also bookstores.
Great.
Because it doesn't have bookstores, won't touch anything that comes out of Amazon.
Oh.
But there's another print on demand outfit that is printing up the book. If it's much easier to get in with a video than sit down with a book, then you go to the website.
Yes.
Now, the website has the name, carries the name of my major book, which is Evolution Diverted.
Ah.
Okay? So evolutiondiverted.com. Evolutiondiverted.com, you go to videos and you pull down the menu for the Mesopotamian Tale in Performance. And there's a show that I put on in New York a few years ago, complete with music and dance, that I think has a good chance of grabbing you. Okay. And if you're hooked, then you're going to want to try to get through Evolution Diverted. It is, I can't give advice on how to do it. It's weighty. What it says on the cover is probing the mystery of our history and how a forgotten intrusion is driving humanity to self-destruct.
Hmm.
Okay.
Damn.
So that's what my work is about.
I think it's remarkable that you and the producer that you're now working with have connected. Call it kismet, call it fate, destiny, or complete happenstance and accident. I think it's marvelous that you've connected with somebody who can assist you in realizing this story in popular culture terms that regular folks can embrace, or hopefully at least be open to.
Yeah, it would be it'll be a big inoculation. So let's see. One of the sad things about Sitchin's books is that I am sure that he was a meticulous note taker.
No doubt.
And had references up the giggy. But when it came to publishing, here's the real world, stepping in. And the publisher said, in order to sell, this has got to come across, as a popular work. And footnotes, heavy footnotes and citations are going to kill it. And so all of his books came out frustratingly for me, because I don't know which tablet he's talking about. I don't know which period, I just take it on. I think I'm justified, but it's certainly not scholarly, to take it on faith, that yes, this is what it says in that tablet. Yes, and yes, Zechariah, that is an accurate translation, So I've had to take it on faith, which is why a friend of mine, scientist, medical scientist, reading an early draft of the book, said, Mike, this is not science. It's art. I said, okay, I'll take that,
It's
But
offhand. I don't know whether it's a compliment or an insult.
well, you know, if I'm in the tradition of Leonardo da Vinci, I can't complain.
Uh,
Art and and often, art will have to lead science, so that's okay. That's okay. Um, um, so where should we go next? What I've done is, number one, try to make the totality of Sitchin's writings more readable, more understandable, because it's hard often to follow the chronology. It's hard to follow the characters because in his books he jumps from Sumerian to Akkadian to Babylonian, and the names are different. The titles of the tablets are different. So it's very easy to get confused. So I did my best to sort it out. Then there are some gaps where he just left it open because there's no way to explain something, or he speculated in a way that not all that sound scientifically, and more recent discoveries, have clarified. So I expanded on the Mesopotamian tale, and a major part of the book, Evolution Diverted, is an expansion of the tale. Then, since the theory cannot be proven, can't come anywhere near proof, one way to establish the authenticity, the validity of an idea, is to demonstrate its utility. It's like doing a thought experiment, like Einstein used to do. He said, well, if this is true, what does it mean? What follows? Okay. And the first thing that was, that I chose to present was a number of quandaries, things in reality, in the world, that just cannot be explained by the existing paradigms. They just can't, and science either ignores it or shrugs and says, it'll someday we'll figure it out, but these are, some of them sizable questions that are easy to resolve once the Mesopotamian tale is accepted as valid. Small example, small but not so small. Okay, the pace of morphologic change in the evolutionary story of the hominins, the Homo line, okay, shows a steady rate of change over time. In other words, you take a look at a particular bone or shape of the pelvis. The things will steadily grow or change in this direction or that direction, yes, in proportion to time, except when we appear. The difference between Homo erectus, our immediate predecessor species, and Homo sapiens was so big that it should have taken another 1 or 1.5 million years for us to naturally evolve. The explanation for accelerated morphologic change is, it's like, that doesn't make any sense, particularly since it's demonstrated for only one species.
Mike, can I jump in for a moment and ask a question? Are we talking about that extraordinary period of time, 33,000 years ago or so, when a number of things occurred, or we have rediscovered, that in the spirit of what you're saying, they make no sense of how things could have speeded up at that moment? The first musical instruments, the first pieces of art, the first movable structures, garments.
Well, those are some of those. In a word, yes, but in a word, yes. Uh, um, so that I mean, there are cultural and artifact parallels to this purely biological marker, that I'm talking about. Okay.
Right.
Um, so that's just one mystery, which is easily resolved. Another is well, anyway. Okay, so there were some mysteries that are easy to solve, and then there are a series of realities about human existence that are much easier to understand in the context of this story. And then I go on and say, okay, well then, how can awareness begin to change things? How can we use it? And that's what next? Is to me the juiciest part of the book. It's like what? How are we going to do? How is religion going to help rather than hurt?
Yes.
And religion is it's inseparable. The scientific aspect of this, and the religious spiritual aspect of this, and I'll and it's one of the big stumbling blocks for us, because the trouble begins, or one aspect of the trouble begins when powerful giant humanoids from another planet ruling mankind present themselves as deities. So you have self-deified personages that are literally worshipped. And what happens over time, and I'm compressing a whole lot here in just a few words, excuse me, but what happens is that the deified personages, after they leave Earth and return home, they lead logically to personified, the concept of personified divine, personified deities. So the mainstream, the monotheisms, they and there are branches of each of them that do not follow this trouble, that have freed themselves of it. But the main trouble that they are in is that they are presenting the divine as a being, and by doing so, they are perpetuating the original history of subservience to these rulers. If you read the Hebrew Bible, if you read mostly Exodus and Deuteronomy, the God that's presented there is just an updated version of a typical Mesopotamian lord. Selfish, violent, vindictive, demanding, that I would say, Peter, that my beginning on this path happened sometime pre-bar mitzvah, but I stayed with the practice because of loyalty to my parents,
Sure.
And I was looking forward to the gifts. I worked so hard in Hebrew school, I might as well profit,
Right there with you.
So, but it hit me at some point that, this maker of the universe that they're talking about, this judgmental, punitive, demanding, that it can. There's no such thing. It cannot be. That is just not right. I said, the hell with that. I am not, not buying that for one more minute. Of course, I also said, well, if I'm wrong,
Lightning comes right through the ceiling and you're vaporized.
boy, am I in for trouble?
Big trouble.
But I guess an awful lot followed from that revelation.
I jump in for just a moment because as you speak, it brings up thoughts and memories as always with compelling guests. At 13, struggling away to learn the Hebrew I needed to read my Torah and Haftorah portions, and not having it down by bar mitzvah date. And my bar mitzvah date had to be pushed back several months. So I was bar mitzvahed with two other boys. And of course, in the Jewish tradition at 13, this marks your being a man. I look at photographs of myself when I was 13, looking 8, and realizing I was anything but. But I think one of the gifts of growing up in the Reformed Jewish tradition was there was a great deal of dogma. In so many words, it came down to, for me, God is love. Figure the rest out for yourself. Ask questions. And as time passed, and looking back on it now, I feel very fortunate that I didn't have to struggle with a great deal of dogma and ultimately overcome it, as opposed to, not seeing things in that mechanical way. So I appreciate what you're saying.
It came, yes, thank you. It came back to me with a ironic kick with my son's bar mitzvah, because the father had the great honor of reading directly from the Torah. So it was spread out before me, and I was reading that week's section, and I practiced it, and because it's not so easy to read that script from the Torah with no vowels, and I was kind of laughing inside while very seriously and sonorously, reading this and filling the space with these, words of God. What were the words of God? The words of God in this passage were the architectural details of how the tabernacle was to be made, how long the sticks were, where the gold went, how the carving was, like, it's like I'm reading architectural specifications, and this is holy writ. This is holy writ. But by the way, the idea that the Bible is the Word of God, first of all, it falls completely apart when anybody does any scholarly work on the translation. I'm reading the most up-to-date translation these days, Alper's, and it's fantastic. What a hodgepodge it is, and how much evidence there is of scribal error, and how it's clearly there's patching in from Mesopotamian sources, themes. But anyway, the idea, though, that it's the Word of God is not completely crazy. If you're pardon the expression, is not totally meshuggah, because so many of the elements in the story in the Bible Like, for example, the transformed flood story. When I say transformed, because it is a masterful revision of the Mesopotamian flood story.
Mm.
Okay, and the Mesopotamian texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood, the origin stories, the origin of of the crafting of the first humans, the
Yes.
first Adam, which means earthman, by the way. Adam means earthman. Um, um, all of these were dictated to the scribes by the self-deified gods. So the words of the gods are in the stories. So it's not entirely crazy to say that's the word of God, because they dictated the stories that then got that got copied and edited and patched in to the Hebrew Bible.
I know for some listeners and viewers, some of the views you're expressing may be heretical to them in terms of their beliefs. Let me push that a little further to the edge of the cliff. Do you feel when this visitation or these visitations to our planet began that these other intelligences, these aliens, for lack of a better word, that they encountered a rudimentary form of humanity here, and with a certain amount of gene splicing or information introduced, or appearances of highly advanced technological vehicles, um, that they simply, that this was something that they became more deeply involved in, so to say, or they entered with a plan? And if so, what was it about? Was it kind of just, and again, of course, this is all as subjective as it can be. Do you feel that it was more a matter of, we've encountered this form of life, let's affect it, let's impact on it, let's study it and see how our actions are responded to here, or that there's another scenario instead?
My answer to that is yes and no.
Fair enough.
At the surface, it's a flat no. That's not the story. Okay.
Hmm.
However, stepping back at a bigger scope, you can say, well, there is an experiment going on here. There is the huge, experiment. Now, I think we have enough time that I can give you the story, because it's not right to call them who the people that the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, which translates those of heaven who are on earth. Okay, it's not right to call them aliens, because they are simply extraterrestrial members of our solar system. And here's the story that, this is an insertion into the story that that Sitchin put together. This is what Brenner put together. Okay. Originally, the third rock from the sun is not Earth. The planet that became Earth was the fifth rock from the sun, between Mars and Jupiter. And on a planet very much Earth-like, basically in the same energetic atmosphere, the same distance from the sun, very much the same chemical composition of the planet, okay, evolved a hominin species that became an advanced humanoid, okay, and a highly technical race. They found that their planet was going to be thrust out of the system into the deep dark of space. This is, I can't get into this now, but this is a common occurrence. And even though that event and that planet is rare, is unique in our solar system, it's very, very common all over our section of the galaxy. Okay, that planets get thrown out or almost thrown out from the circular orbit around the sun that they were born in. The only way this could have happened to that planet was through a conjunction of some of the gas giants, Jupiter and Saturn. Maybe others were involved too, creating a gravitational slingshot which threw that planet way out into space, where they're going to be so far from the sun it would be frozen. In order to survive the cataclysm of expulsion, okay, they could only have done one thing, and that is to go underground.
Okay.
And that's the origin of the city of Zion in the Matrix movies. Okay, they had to go underground in order to survive. The planet gets thrown out into a highly elliptical orbit, one that revisits the central solar system every 3,600 years. And to make the planet's surface habitable, they came up with this idea of surrounding the atmosphere with a shell of gold. This is only a slight extrapolation of what's in the tablets. Okay, so they shot gold, probably monoatomic gold, which we're just learning about now, into a shell which would reflect the heat that they would generate artificially, nuclear, geothermal, whatever their sources were. So they were able to return to the surface, unfreeze the oceans, and have a life on a highly artificial, seasonless world. Okay. This planet, as I said, visited the inner solar system every 3,600 years. And the fifth rock from the sun was probably involved in the extrusion because one of the aspects of its orbit was that it always crossed through the system. It crossed the orbit of the fifth planet. That gave it one of its 50 honorific names, Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, or the planet that crosses. According to the tablets, on one fateful crossing, a moon, one of several moons of that planet, crashed into the fifth planet and tore a great hole in it, changing its orbital velocity and making it have to get closer to the sun, where it entered the now long vacant third orbit and became the Earth. By the way, my reasoning, and this is another juicy part of the book, is that scar is the basin of the Pacific Ocean. Okay, and they just sent a craft out to explore an asteroid which is unique. They have found an asteroid that seems to be highly metallic. It's going to be a few years before the probe gets there. But the reasoning is this seems to be the core of a planet. Well, they might find that it's the core of the moon of Nibiru that got pulverized. The debris from the debris from that crashed moon and what was torn out of the fifth planet became the asteroid belt. Okay, and that was the way it was, and life had been evolving on the fifth planet, somewhat behind the evolution of life on what had been the third planet, because it was further from the sun and had less solar energy. Okay, so but the planet was very, very similar in chemical composition. We'll get into that later. At some point, the golden shell around Nibiru was beginning to fail. And life on the surface was threatened. Earlier, an explorer had found gold on Earth. And so an expedition was sent to Earth so that they could see if they could mine gold. And if they could successfully mine gold, when Nibiru approached, they could ship it back home, and the planetary disaster could be avoided. So that was the purpose of the founding of the Earth colony, which the first place of landing was southern Mesopotamia at the head of the Persian Gulf, just outside the Great Marsh, which is still there to some extent. All of this went on for 140,000 years or so, until the miners, the commoner miners in Africa, where the gold mines were, rebelled. They had very, very long lives, and their conditions of life were terrible. So there was a mutiny, and the king from Nibiru came and said, "This has got to be resolved because we need the gold." And the second in command of the Earth colony was a scientist and engineer, and he says, "I got an idea. We can modify a creature," and he was pointing to Homo erectus. "We can modify a creature which is a lot like us, with our own genes, and create a mixed worker to be our slaves." That's the origin of humanity in Africa. Small, dark servants. That was our initial identity. Okay, and so that is the basis of the shame. Nothing is worse than being a slave and being an inferior being. Then the traumatization came about because the humans became the equivalent in those days of cannon fodder. They became the warriors in the eternal battle of the lords, that the culture that they had brought, the traumatized culture that they brought from Nibiru to Earth. They were in constant war with each other. It was forever war for power, glory, and riches. And the humans were the spear carriers, and the sources of the blood that soaked all the sands of the Middle East, as it is still doing. That was the origin of the hybrids, which is us, and the deep confusion, because we began with no community of our own kind to teach us anything. We could see two very different parent species. Okay, and so we begin with three identities, three forms of consciousness in us. One is the advanced creature from Nibiru, who's I know that's the source of our universal feelings, like, I don't belong here. What am I doing here? Okay. And then there was this little creature that had been, happy in living in harmony with nature, and that's the source of all of our feelings, like, hey, I just want to be in the woods, leave me alone, I just, life is beautiful. What and then the confused being, which was the early human. So that's the third identity. Is this, who am I? That's the source of our, who am I? What am I doing? What's my purpose? That's the original source of that. So we have three forms of consciousness that never got a chance to get integrated. So,
Mike, do you feel that any organized religion that has evolved on Earth, in some part of its teachings, has a sense of this and includes it, in its theology, so to say, or that no organized religion on Earth really has embraced or faced this possible point of involvement?
only in highly encoded forms. All of the indigenous traditions that say we were created by this god or that god, or which is, by the way, why the fight goes on between the scientists, and the literal faithful. They won't yield their position. That's because, to an extent, both are right. We were naturally evolved up to the point of Homo erectus, and we were made in the image and likeness of God. Those are the language from Genesis, because they literally, actually, Enki, the engineer scientist, Lord, actually used his own genes in the crafting of the first human. So we were literally made in the image and likeness of a god. So they're both right.
As we come into our last few minutes, I just wanted folks to know that they can order Evolution Diverted or A Mesopotamian Tale, like any book in print, on Amazon. As a book lover who is more and more troubled that more and more people read less and less for any reason, I would encourage all of you to read these books, but to order them, if at all possible, from your local bookstore. And just quoting from some of the reviews on Evolution Diverted, read this account with an open mind. You might accept its thesis, reject it, or remain agnostic, but you will not be bored. Stanley Kipner, PhD professor, Department of Psychology, Saybrook University. The challenge presented to the reader by Evolution Diverted is to try on for size a new reality, to explore its implications and possibilities without a priori claiming it to have veracity, and to find out for oneself if accepting that our species' original challenges are a factor in our personal difficulties can actually be of help in overcoming our own. Linda Gooding, Professor Emeritus, Emory University. Mike Brenner has created a powerful, important, and entirely readable book. It shifted me into a different paradigm. Associate Professor Michael Reddy, Columbia University. Your books are genuinely paradigm shifting and a challenge to the reader. What is your website, Mike, for anybody that wants to get more involved or learn more or correspond with you as we come into our last few minutes here?
Evolutiondiverted.com.
Great.
And one little quote that that was transmitted to me personally, I think it appears somewhere in the blurbs. A dear friend, a rabbi friend, who was friendly with both Sitchin and Velikovsky.
Oh my.
Yeah, he's still with us. And he said, Mike, this book changed my life. So I'm and if it's not something you can do, wait around for a couple of years. The movie's coming.
I know that you'll keep me appraised of how things develop and hopefully what will become a film. And I'm going to ask you now to return in a few months as part of a panel discussion on this subject and some of its wider implications. Any thoughts as we come into our last minute, my friend?
Don't be discouraged if the whole thing feels like it's just too much, because it is too much. It upends these discoveries upend so much that you thought you knew. It's a challenge because because while it's true that the truth will set you free, you do need a certain amount of freedom in order to be able to appreciate the truth. So you know, the longer you stay with this material, I think,
Yes.
the more you hear it, the more you think about it, the more, the more and more it can become, well, of course,
Yeah.
this is the only, this explains it. Linda, my friend Linda, who you quoted there, whose quote you read, she said, all along, she's a traditional scientist, she said all along she knew that the story that we're given about how we came up with this, there's something fundamentally wrong about the history that we're given, that it just doesn't
And
click.
on that note, my friend, we have to end our time together. Mike Brenner, thank you so much
Well,
for
thank
joining
you.
me tonight.
And all you out there who's stuck with this for 2 hours, my thanks.
Peter Robbins here. Meanwhile, here on Earth, join us next week. Bye for now.